Okay, now that we've learned the basic mechanics for how we kind of just enter some numbers and do some arithmetic operations with those numbers in Grasshopper, let's turn our attention to the whole issue of how we start actually creating some interesting geometry. So one of the most basic elements that you might want to work with is point. So let's go ahead and kind of find that node. Oh, it actually sort of exists kind of in a funny spot. So I tend to actually go at it just by double clicking and entering in here. But there's a function that's all about points. Now there's a lot of operations for points. So this one, don't be fooled by. This is if you have a point, you kind of cast things into that point. It's actually called construct point. There it is. And that's the one that lets you take x, y, z's and convert them into points. Now you might notice, let me even over here, see if I can make that the full window so you can see everything over there and the Rhino interface. Hand that over a little bit. Okay, that we have created a point. It's hanging around right here at the 0, 0, 0 point. That's because the defaults for these are 0, 0, 0. Okay, so that's kind of a starting point. If we want to go through and kind of start changing that, we can add in some sliders. So for example, I'll do a nice little number slider in here. Okay, and I'll set the values on that to be, let that spin for just a second. I want to set it to a bunch of integers. Oh, maybe going 0 to 10. Great. And I can plug those in as my x values. That'll just move along the x-axis. I can plug them in as my y values. If I use the same values, I'm going to be moving at a 45 degree, just down on the plane. I can connect them as the z values too. Okay, so I can just basically create some basic points, and that's kind of a good start for where we want it to be. Okay, next up we want to think about, how we can create a series of different points, because often we want to do things with a whole bunch of points. So we're just basically going to go through and tie a series function into this. Let's go through, and I will take, again, this basic logic, just so I can kind of keep that hanging around. Control C, I'll Control V it on down here. Okay, and we're going to think about, rather than just kind of tying in a single point, how we could actually do a series of points instead. Okay, so you might imagine we want the series function. So I'll maybe use a series for the x values and let that just be the y values instead. So I'll disconnect that there, or I can just actually connect this in, that'll override. So it's waiting for a series. The series needs a start, it needs a step increment, it needs a number. So let's go through and we'll just put in some panels to do some of these things. I'm going to start it at 0. Actually, about to make a mistake. I don't need that semicolon. And that's my dynamo things. For the step, I'll put that in there also as a value. I'm going to step it, let's say, every 2. And then finally, for the number, notice it's already started to create some in there. Okay. Let's give a count in here. I'll put a slider in for that. So for my count, again, I'm going to go for an integer number. Just anywhere for up to 10 points. Okay, so let's think about this right now. We have a series that goes, there's only 0 of them. That's not a very good count. You can see them starting to fill in. I'm going to pull this one further out so it's not bothering us so much. So it's sort of confusing the image of what's going on there. Great. So I'll pull this row back a little further, and you can sort of see I'm creating a count, a series of the different points. Okay, and that actually works out pretty well for creating a series of points. That's really the beginning of what we want to do, because often we'll want to do things with those points. Let's go ahead and kind of think about how we could actually construct a grid of points. A grid is actually always typically just, well, if you take two different series and you kind of wind them together, you kind of interlace them, as we would say. Okay, you are often going to go through and be able to create a nice grid, and let's take a look at what that would look like. So I'm going to go and copy this and paste this down, just so I have something nice to work with. Okay, and let's think about this. As opposed to this y coordinate, a single y coordinate, if I wanted to create a nice 2D grid, it could be a 3D grid also, but let me just do a nice 2D grid as a starting point. Okay, I'm going to take that out. Okay, for these, I'll just set the y coordinate to 0 to kind of keep them out of the way for right now. Okay. If I want to go through and create this grid, I got the x values. Let's go ahead and try connecting that into the y values too. So I take that same series and I kind of connect them in there. And you'll see what I got looks a little bit wrong. What we're doing, what you're seeing right now is that I have kind of, the x's and y's. It's basically pairing the two values together, but it's not interlacing. It's not actually creating a grid. And that's similar to the problem we had in Dynamo. If I want to go through and actually create a grid of them, I need to do something called interlacing them, or in the words of Grasshopper, in the terms it uses, it's called cross-referencing them. So let's kind of take a look at that function, because what I need to do is just add that in here. I'll say cross-reference. Okay, the idea is we have an A list, a B list, we can even have a C list if I have 3 different things that I want to cross by each other. But I'm going to basically take that A list. I'm going to use the same list because it's going to make a square grid, but it could be 2 different lists. And I'll plug in those as the A's. Oops, those are the Z's now. That's not what I wanted. I want to plug them in for the Y's. And let me disconnect the Z's. Okay, so I have a nice grid in there. Now, this is what's called a holistic cross-reference. It's kind of just cross-referencing everything, kind of making the complete series of combinations. There's some different variations in there you might want to look at. There's coincident. That says doesn't create the combinations when they have the same index. That kind of takes out the middles. There's the lower triangle, the upper triangle. There's the lower triangle strict. Okay, but I'm going to go back to holistic. Okay, and that'll really populate everything fully. And again, if I wanted to create a 3D grid of points, you saw me do it by accident, but you can sort of imagine what it looks like here. I can take the same list where, if I want to add the 3rd dimension to it, what I'll do is, it's one of those ones where I have to zoom in. I only have an A and B list. I can add a C list. And again, we'll take the 3rd one and then feed that in as the Z values. Okay, now all of a sudden I have the full 3D grid. Okay, but that's not what I want. So I'm going to take that back out. All right, 2D grid for now. Okay, so I'm creating my grid of points. That's looking good. I'm previewing everything in the Rhino window. Yeah, we don't need to kind of worry about the background view. You just sort of see the 2 things side by side if you kind of set it up this way. Super. Now let's go ahead and take these points and do something interesting with them. So we want to go through and think about maybe creating some lines. That's kind of a good starting point. So let's think about how we can do that. I'm just going to, again, copy some stuff over here, since these are pretty good. I got a nice series here. Actually, I'll do it back up here. I'll take these points. And what will I do? I kind of pull them out so you can sort of see my series of points a little bit better. If I take this and set the value to be, like 50 or something like that. Okay, those are the points I'm working with right now. So I got a bunch of points there. And if I want to start thinking about creating some lines, I can. So the line function basically uses a starting point and an ending point. So let me just kind of pan around over here and kind of take a look at that. I'm going to say that I'm going to use my line function between 2 points right here. So that's A and B. That's looking pretty good. You might say, okay, I got a bunch of points there. If I want to start creating things, I could use those as the starting points for some lines. Okay, let's think about the ending point. We still need a nice ending point for these lines. So let's kind of think about that. I'll just kind of create another point over here. Let me Control V, C, Control V. Okay, if I just disconnect all this stuff, and disconnect this one. Okay. Now I have 0, 0, 0. So if I connected those, they would all just radiate back out there. If I wanted to have a point, a series, we're just sort of having slightly different y values to them or something like that, I could do that too. For example, I could take this series and feed them as x values, let the y values be 0. And now it's a little hard to see because I have the grid back in there. But I am connecting just the whole series of points in there. Okay, even over here, well, we can do a lot of different things. Let's take our series, let me add something to it. I can take my series, I'm adding 0 to it right now, so there's not going to be any offset. So that'll look about the same right now. But if I went through and put a little offset in there, you can see I can start shifting them around. So it's easy to go ahead and work with lines. That's actually pretty good. Next thing up is you might want to start thinking about doing some lines that fit between some different things. The fitting of the line works just a little bit differently. Okay. What we can do with that is, let me go ahead and we'll just use our line function. Over here, that's again going to be our starting point. Okay, but in terms of, oh, actually, not that one. I'm getting ahead of myself in a bad way. Okay. Let me say, how do I do that? Must be a widget in here. Let me put the solver back in there. Okay. Let's go back and say that we want to do our fit line. Just fitting a curve. Okay, that's just the best fit line. Here's the deal here. We have a series here where it's basically looking for a collection of points. Okay, and, that's kind of a new concept. In the world of Dynamo, we have the notion of a list of points. We need to create a collection of points, which is essentially a list. And this is one that always confuses me because I never remember the word for it. But in our language here in Grasshopper, it's called a merge. So I can pull some different things in here together. So for example, if I take a point, and maybe I'll have a point just at 0, 0, 0 by disconnecting that. And then I have another point, okay, which is, let's put that at a y value of, let's call it 15. And bring those together. That'll be a best fit line. Now, it's not a very interesting line because, that line's kind of right on the axis. It's on the x-axis right now. So we need to go through and give it a third point for you really to see anything. Let's give it a third point over here. I'll Control C this. Put a third point in there. Okay, and then, for the y value of that. I'll let that be the x value. Well, actually, you're already starting to see a best fit line within there. Another one in there. Give it a different y value. So the y value of this one will be, 15 by 15 is fine. Actually, that was already there. We'll make it 25. Okay, so we're doing a best fit line. So just watch out for this. The line, the function's actually very easy. It's just that as we pull these different lines together, we have to merge them and make that best fit line. Yeah, let me do this for you, just so that we kind of have this set up nicely in the example file. I'll just pull all those together and group that. Yeah, just so you sort of have a sense of what we were doing as we kind of started. We've been littering the landscape with all these different nodes here. Okay, almost done. Let's go ahead and take a look at a curve. A curve is very similar. For curves, we have two different ways of doing curves. We can go through and interpolate a curve, or we can do a NURBS curve. And if we interpolate a curve, what it's going to do is create a curve that goes through the different points, actually goes literally through the points. If we don't interpolate the curve, if we say a NURBS curve, then it's going to use those points as control points around the edge. So let's just kind of take a look at really what that is, or how that works. See if I can copy this on down. And do that. After I copy them, it's kind of a funny thing about copying in Grasshopper. Control C, Control V. It puts things right on top of each other, and that is always hard. So got a couple that are right on top of each other. See if I got another one in there. Yeah, so I have three on top of each other. That's not very good. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to keep on working on my copying of groups because that's actually a little bit tricky. But what I will do then is go through and just grab these individual points. And I'll merge them together again. Can I copy that and paste that? That I know how to do. Okay, I got my different points here. Let's take a look at how we can actually go through and work with these. Oh, I'll just disconnect that best fit line. So that's not bothering us. Okay. Maybe even over here. Oh, we'll leave the other one. Okay, we're going to go through and say that we're going to do an interpolate to make a curve between all these. So I'm going to say interpolate. Oh, let me keep on finding it. There's the interpolated curve. Okay, it's basically looking for a list of vertices. So if I bring that in there, let's see if it's able to make a curve. It looks like it's working on trying to make a curve out of that right now. Let's see if it's able to. There we go. So it actually created a curve through those three different points, like 1, 2, and 3. Okay, let's go through and kind of show you the other type of curve, though, that's available, and that's a NURBS curve. NURBS curve is similar in function. You still have to feed it a collection. So those are the control points. Let's see what it's not liking. Input parameter k failed to collect data. Okay, so this function a little bit wrong. NURBS not vector. Empty number vector. Not k as a list. I'm going to have to go ahead and play around with that a little bit. I think that I don't have the right function. Let me try that again. Did I get the wrong one? Let's try this one. Ah, looks like I have the wrong one. That'll explain it. Okay, let me remove this one here. Looks like I had chosen a function that had a little bit more power to it that I wasn't exploiting. I was expecting some more inputs. So here's the NURBS curve. This is the one that's interpolated all the way through. This inner one is using them as control points, so it's not going all the way out there. Okay, enough of all that fun. Let's go through and just do some very simple geometry then. In terms of some spheres and things like that. I'll show you how to place some of those. For this, let me go through and, what do I want to do? I want to create a nice group out of all those. Group, there we go. Let's go back up again. So way back up here somewhere, you might remember we went through and created a nice grid of things, okay, and all those different points. Let's think about how we can actually put some things on there. So all those points are great as points, but let's think about if we want to make circles on those points. We can type in circle, and there's several different construction methods. The CNR, center normal radius, is the one that I tend to use. So if, for example, I want to put circles at all those center points, looks like it's still doing its work. You can see it's created a whole bunch of circles there. So circles are an easy one. Again, if you want to change the radius, we can put a slider on there and control that. Spheres are actually very similar to circles. So I'll just type sphere in here. Spheres, there's one at 0, 0 right now. If I want to put one at all the points, I can do that. And again, control the radius. I want to, again, put a slider on the radius. I can decide how big I want those to be. Doing a little work right now. There we go. Small radius, bigger radius. And finally, last but not least, let's go through and look at the issue of a cylinder. That is, again, we can use those all as the base points. The two different functions or additional functions we have available here are the radius of the cylinder and also the height of the cylinder. So again, add some sliders or add some values in there to go ahead and control those. Super. So there are some examples to get you started on just how you can kind of create some interesting geometry within the Grasshopper environment. Go ahead and use those to go ahead and construct the examples that you need.